I don't know how much time I have left, or how many more nights I can bear this weight upon my soul. You can simply call me the Cardinal. Although my faith should be my refuge, it has lately become a burden, a yoke that crushes my spirit. Since joining the church, I have borne witness to secrets the world is not ready to know, truths that challenge sanity and the very essence of humanity. But of all these secrets, there is one in particular I can no longer keep. Over the centuries, the Vatican has been the guardian of countless mysteries. Some perhaps are fantastical tales from ages past, legends exaggerated over time, but others are all too real and far too dark. In our underground chambers lie documents that will never see the light of day, objects that shouldn't exist, and testimonies that would chill the blood of even the most devout believer. I have dedicated my life to faith, but I wonder if that faith is enough to bear what I know. It was in 1980 when I received the order. The prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Luciani, summoned me to his office. As always, his office was shrouded in shadows, with heavy red curtains barely letting in the daylight. His voice, usually serene and firm, had a hint of unease I had never detected before. "A report from Transylvania," he said, handing me a sealed envelope bearing the papal crest. "I need you to read it and prepare to leave immediately." I took the envelope. From the beginning, I knew this would not be an ordinary mission. The region mentioned in the letter was the Apuseni Mountains. I opened the envelope and began to read. The report described a series of brutal attacks in a small mountain village, bodies found in indescribable conditions with torn limbs and missing organs. The terrified local authorities had turned to the church for a solution to what could only be described as the work of the devil. As I read, I felt a pressure in my chest, a foreboding that grew stronger with every word. This was not just a case of exorcism or a simple pastoral intervention. Something dark was hidden behind this mission, something the Vatican was determined to keep secret at all costs, and I had been chosen to uncover it. "I understand," I murmured. He studied my reaction with his gray eyes. "Tonight, a team will be waiting for you with a special vehicle. I know this is a difficult task, but I trust you will rise to the occasion." I nodded, knowing I had no choice. One does not say no to the church. I spent the rest of the day preparing my luggage and my thoughts, trying to find some solace in prayer. As the sun set, I headed to the parking lot on the outskirts of the Vatican, where a modified military jeep awaited me, with a closed cabin and reinforced cage inside. It was a vehicle designed to transport more than just people. Clearly, the church spared no expense on missions like this. As the jeep drove through Rome's dark streets, my mind couldn't stop imagining what awaited me in those remote mountains of Transylvania. I knew I was heading to confront an ancient evil, but I did not know if I was prepared for what awaited in the Apuseni Mountains. However, one thing was certain: my faith was about to be tested like never before. The journey to the Apuseni Mountains was long and exhausting. As the jeep wound its way along Transylvania's serpentine roads, we finally arrived at the village, and the atmosphere was even more oppressive. It was a small, remote place, nestled between the mountains and surrounded by dense forests that isolated it from the rest of the world. The houses, made of stone and wood, seemed to have been built centuries ago, with red-tiled roofs covered in moss and small windows shielded by carved wooden shutters. Despite it being broad daylight, the village was cloaked in an unsettling gloom, as if the sun avoided illuminating the place. The few villagers we saw as we entered watched us with a mix of curiosity and distrust. Their faces were hardened, marked by years of labor in the fields and, perhaps, by fear. Some made the sign of the cross as they saw us, while others simply stepped aside, murmuring among themselves. We made our way to the mayor's house, ENL, a severe-looking man with sun-weathered skin and sunken eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. He greeted us at the door of his home, a sturdy stone structure that stood out among the others for its size and slightly more cared-for appearance. "Welcome, Your Eminence," he said in a deep voice, bowing slightly. I knew the church wouldn't take long to respond. "Thank you for receiving us, INL," I replied. "We understand you've been through difficult times, and we are here to help in any way we can." INL nodded, inviting us inside. The house was decorated with antique furniture and a large fireplace that dominated the room. We sat around a sturdy wooden table, and Ionel began recounting the strange and horrific events that had plagued his village. "A few weeks ago," he began tensely, "a man came to the village seeking refuge. He seemed to be running from something, but never told us what it was. All he asked for was a place to stay, and I, as a good Christian, couldn't deny him help. We offered him one of the houses we use to shelter refugees and others in need." As Ionel spoke, I couldn't help but notice how his face reflected a mixture of regret and fear. "At first, everything seemed normal," he continued. "The man volunteered to help on the farms and seemed peaceful, though he always kept to himself. But shortly after his arrival, strange things began to happen. The villagers started hearing noises at night, screams coming from the forest, and then we found the bodies. The bodies were mutilated in ways I can't describe. The villagers who discovered them were traumatized. Some wouldn't even talk about it. There were men, women, even some children, dismembered with missing body parts. It seemed like the work of a beast, but not one we knew. Something else was happening." "And this man?" I asked. "What happened to him after the attacks?" Ionel looked at me, his eyes reflecting deep fear. "After the first attack, we began to suspect him. We knew there was something strange about his behavior, and though we had no proof, many in the village started saying he was the one bringing misfortune." Ionel left the sentence unfinished, his voice breaking. "We found a scene that I can only describe as the work of the devil himself. It was the third night after the man arrived," Ionel began, his voice low and trembling. "It was a quiet dawn, with the sun barely hinting at the horizon. The full moon hung high, bathing the village in a pale and eerie light. Everything seemed calm until, without warning, the screams shattered the silence. They were blood-curdling screams, filled with terror, coming from the refugee house. We all woke up immediately," Ionel continued. "The men of the village, armed with whatever we could find, ran toward the house. As we approached, the air was filled with a nauseating smell. Blood. My heart froze at the thought of what we might find." Ionel's eyes seemed lost in the memory, reliving every moment with painful clarity. "When we arrived, the door was wide open. Inside, everything was chaos. Blood everywhere, the bodies of the refugees scattered across the floor, torn apart in ways I can't even describe. It seemed like the work of a beast, something inhuman." He paused, as though the words were stuck in his throat. But the worst was in the corner of the room. There we saw him, the strange man, but he was no longer himself. His body had changed. He was covered in gray fur, his hands had turned into claws, and his face was a monstrosity, a snout with sharp fangs and blood-red eyes. We stood frozen, unable to move. The beast was devouring what remained of one of the refugees. It was a vision straight out of the depths of hell. But then, something changed. The sunlight filtered through the window and fell upon him. The creature began to writhe, its howls turning into human screams, and little by little, the beast disappeared, leaving behind the man we knew. Ionel closed his eyes, as if trying to erase the image from his mind. He was weak, naked, and covered in blood, but no longer a beast. Some of the men wanted to kill him on the spot, to end the monster. But I couldn't do it. I knew this was something bigger, something that required the church's intervention. We chained him and kept him under watch until you arrived." I nodded slowly, grasping the gravity of the situation. I knew that what we were facing wasn't something that could be resolved with violence or simple faith. This was an ancient darkness, an evil that required the intervention of forces beyond ordinary men. "You did the right thing by keeping him alive," I said in a calm yet firm voice. "This man, or whatever he is, needs to be taken to the Vatican. His fate will be decided there." Ionel nodded, though doubt and fear were still etched on his face. "Please, Your Eminence," he said, his voice barely concealing his plea, "free us from this curse. We cannot go on living in this terror." I stood up, and accompanied by Ionel, I headed to the house where the man was chained. As we entered the house, the stench of blood still lingered in the air, and the vacant eyes of the gathered villagers followed me as I approached the chained figure in the corner. The man, his head covered with a bag and bound with thick chains, barely moved. He seemed defeated, a prisoner of his own curse. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, knowing that what would happen next would change my life and the lives of everyone present forever. "My name is the Cardinal," I said in a calm voice. "I'm here to offer you help, but we need you to come with us." "There is no help for someone like me," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm doomed, cursed by something beyond human understanding." "Whatever has happened to you, we can find a solution," I insisted. "But we need to take you to the Vatican, where we can address your condition. This village isn't equipped to deal with whatever it is that you carry within you." The man let out a bitter laugh that echoed hauntingly in the room. "Condition? Call it a curse. I've lived with this for so long that I no longer know what it means to be human. But I have no other choice, do I? If I stay here, I'll end up killing them all." His words fell like a heavy weight upon me. I knew he was right. There were no other options. I nodded, trying to show a confidence I barely felt. "This is the right course," I said. "Prepare yourself for the journey. We will take you with us, and I promise we'll do everything we can to help you." I motioned for Ionel to bring the cage. The villagers worked in silence, moving with a mixture of fear and urgency. The chains binding the man were secured before they carefully lifted him and placed him inside the reinforced cage. The process was tense. We all feared a sudden transformation, but the man remained still, almost as if resigned to his fate. Once he was inside, they locked the iron door with a loud clank, securing it with multiple turns of a heavy chain. The vehicle was ready, a jeep specially adapted to transport the cage without attracting too much attention. As we prepared to depart, Ionel approached me, his face marked with worry. "Take care of him, Your Eminence," he said. "I don't know if he's a man or a monster, but I know he can't stay here." "I'll do what I can," I replied. The journey from the village to the Vatican was long and fraught with tension. Inside the vehicle, silence was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the chains restraining the man. "You can't imagine what it's like," he whispered from within the cage, breaking the silence, "to be trapped in this curse, to feel it devouring you from the inside." I leaned in closer, cautiously, trying to discern his words. "Who did this to you?" I asked, my voice echoing in the darkness. "Why are you suffering this damnation?" The man let out a bitter laugh, heavy with a pain only the condemned can know. "It was so long ago. I don't even know how many years have passed. I made a pact I thought would grant me power, but it only condemned me to this existence, to this hell." His words were vague, fragmented, as though his mind was split between the man he had been and the beast now ruling his body. "Who cursed you?" I pressed. "Was this the work of the devil?" "Older than that, darker," he replied, his voice fading to a barely audible murmur. "I'm not just a man possessed. I'm something else, something that even exorcisms cannot purge." We arrived on the outskirts of Rome as night had already fallen. Approaching the Vatican walls, we were directed to a discreet access point, away from prying eyes. The Vatican agents awaiting us moved with speed and precision, securing the cage onto a mobile platform that was quickly covered to avoid being seen. We were led through a secret passage, a dark, narrow tunnel that seemed to descend into the very bowels of the Vatican. The ancient stone walls were covered in moss and dampness, and the echo of our footsteps reverberated in the cold darkness. The only light came from the flashlights carried by the agents, casting shadows that seemed to dance around us. At last, we reached a massive iron door guarded by 2 sentinels who let us pass after confirming our identities. Inside, the chamber was an exorcism room, specially prepared for extreme situations. It was spacious, with solid stone walls and a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into the gloom. In the center, a sturdy wooden table was surrounded by chains and manacles. Around it hung crucifixes, rosaries, and vials of holy water, ready to be used. The agents carefully removed the man from the cage and placed him on the wooden table in the center of the room. They secured the heavy chains binding his limbs to the iron anchors at each corner of the table. The man was exhausted, barely conscious, yet still dangerously unpredictable. "This is the best we can do for now," one of the agents said, his voice filled with concern. "He'll be safe here, and so will we." I called for Cardinal Luciani to initiate the proceedings. The tension in the room was palpable as he prepared for the exorcism. The murmurs ceased, and a heavy silence filled the space. Cardinal Luciani prepared for the ritual with a solemnity only those who have stared into the abyss can understand. His face, usually serene, now bore a mask of steely concentration. In his hands he held the Rituale Romanum, the book of sacred prayers and formulas the Church has used for centuries to combat evil. Beside him, several priests assisted with the traditional instruments: crucifixes, rosaries, vials of holy water, and candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Cardinal Luciani began speaking in Latin, his voice resonating in the cold room like a sacred echo. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, he intoned, making the sign of the cross over the man's body. The man, bound to the table, reacted immediately. His body tensed, and a low growl, almost a roar, emanated from deep within his throat. His eyes, which had been closed until then, flew open, revealing a red glow that did not belong to any human being. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and an invisible pressure began to weigh on everyone present. Exorcizamus te, omnis immundus spiritus, omnis satanica potestas, Luciani continued, his voice growing stronger with each word as he sprinkled holy water over the man's body. The water sizzled as it touched his skin, as if it were burning him. The man screamed, a sound that was not entirely human, filled with pain and rage. His body began to writhe against the chains, which strained to contain the supernatural force emanating from him. His flesh seemed to pulse beneath his skin, as though something inside him was struggling to break free. Cardinal Luciani did not falter. Raising a crucifix with determination, his words flowed with a hypnotic cadence. "Libera, Domine, animum huius creaturae," he proclaimed, stepping closer to the man. As the ritual progressed, the man's reactions became more violent. His body convulsed, veins bulging in his neck and arms, and his face contorted with pain. The priests surrounding the table exchanged worried glances. The tension among them was palpable. They knew this was no ordinary possession. Something far darker and more primal lurked within this body, something that would not yield easily to divine will. Suddenly, the man let out a howl that echoed throughout the chamber, shaking the walls. His body began to transform. Gray-silver fur erupted from his skin, his hands elongated into claws, and his jaw extended into a fierce snout filled with sharp fangs. The beast had returned, defying the prayers and the power of the sacred objects. The priests stepped back, fear evident on their faces. One of them dropped the rosary he was holding, his trembling hands unable to maintain control. Cardinal Luciani, however, did not retreat. With unshakable determination, he continued the ritual, his voice rising above the creature's roars. "In nomine Jesu Christi, exorcizor," he declared with almost defiant firmness. But the exorcism was not working as it should. Each word seemed to inflame the beast further, each drop of holy water only fueling its fury. The chains, groaning against the stone floor, began to strain to their limits. The room's tension turned into palpable terror as it became clear they were losing control. The beast, in a fit of rage, managed to partially lift its torso, the chains vibrating as though about to snap. The creature's blood-red eyes locked onto Luciani, and with inhuman strength, it let out another roar that sent shivers through everyone in the room. The air in the exorcism chamber grew suffocating, heavy with a tension that crushed those present. The transformation from man to beast had reached a point of no return. Cardinal Luciani continued reciting the prayers with fervor, but the faith that had sustained his determination now seemed fragile in the face of the monstrosity unfolding before us. The man's body contorted unnaturally, bones and muscles twisting beneath his skin, as gray-silver fur spread over his increasingly inhuman form. The chains binding him creaked and groaned, unable to contain the force being unleashed. The beast's guttural roars reverberated through the stone walls, a sound so deep and primal it seemed to come from the bowels of hell itself. Luciani raised the crucifix once more, stepping toward the table in a desperate final attempt to assert control. "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti," he began, but before he could complete the prayer, the beast broke free with a violent explosion of brute strength. The chains snapped, and the beast rose from the table with a roar that shook the room. Its fully developed claws gleamed under the flickering candlelight, and its muzzle opened wide to reveal rows of blood-stained, razor-sharp fangs. Cardinal Luciani was the first to fall. The beast charged at him with a speed and ferocity none of us had anticipated. In an instant, Luciani's body was lifted off the ground, the beast's claws ripping through flesh and bone. His scream of agony was cut short by the blood filling his throat as the creature hurled him against the wall with such force that his body was shattered upon impact. Panic erupted among the remaining priests. Some tried to flee, but the chamber's door was sealed. Others, frozen in terror, could only watch as the beast rampaged through the room. One by one, they fell to the creature's claws and fangs, their bodies torn apart and scattered in a gruesome display of violence. The floor was slick with blood, the metallic scent saturating the air. The screams and roars melded into a cacophony of horror that seemed endless. I found myself trapped in a living nightmare, where faith and prayers were powerless against the terror unfolding before my eyes. Amid the carnage, survival instinct kicked in. I frantically searched for something, anything that could stop the beast. But all I found was the massive iron door on the far side of the room, the same door designed to contain whatever evil might escape within these walls. The beast turned its blood-red gaze toward me, pure hatred and fury emanating from its eyes. I knew I was next. Without hesitation, I ran toward the door, the sound of the beast's claws scraping closer with every step. Reaching the door, I pulled the iron lever with all my strength just as the beast lunged at me. The door slammed shut with a deafening clang, separating me from the creature by mere seconds. From the other side, I could hear its enraged roars and the pounding of its claws against the metal as it tried to break through. The echo of its fury filled the stone corridors, and I knew the door wouldn't hold for long. Leaning against the wall, I struggled to catch my breath, tears streaming down my face. I had witnessed the deaths of men of faith, men who had dedicated their lives to battling evil, and now I was alone with an unstoppable monster trapped in a cage that might not hold. I knew there was no time to waste. I had to inform my superiors of what had happened in the exorcism chamber and find a way to deal with the situation before it spiraled even further out of control. I reached the office of the Cardinal Prefect, a place that had always been a haven of calm but now seemed shrouded in a shadow of uncertainty. I knocked forcefully on the door, and before anyone could answer, I opened it abruptly and entered, breathless. The Cardinal Prefect was seated behind his desk, his expression serious and weary. He looked up, surprised by my sudden entrance. "What has happened?" he asked, the gravity in his voice unmistakable. "The exorcism has failed," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. "The creature fully transformed. It is something darker and more dangerous than we anticipated." The Cardinal remained silent for a moment, absorbing my words. I could see the concern growing in his eyes, though he tried to maintain a facade of control. "What do you mean by something more?" he finally asked. Before I could respond, the office door opened again, and a group of men dressed in black entered the room. Their movements were precise, almost military, and they carried with them an air of authority that immediately dominated the atmosphere. One of them, a tall man whose face was partially obscured by the dim light, stepped forward. "Your Eminence," the man addressed the Cardinal Prefect with a tone that blended respect and urgency. "We have been informed of the situation. The creature you have captured is not merely a possessed man, it is a lycanthrope." The Cardinal Prefect furrowed his brow, his face reflecting a mix of disbelief and alarm. "A lycanthrope?" he repeated, as if the word itself were a blasphemy. "But that's impossible. Those creatures are myths." "No, Your Eminence," the man in black replied firmly. "They are real, and the Church has encountered them in the past. This creature is the result of an ancient dark pact, a curse that transforms it into a beast under the full moon's light." I remained silent, listening as the truth unfolded before me. The revelation struck me like a blow. What we had faced was not merely a case of demonic possession. It was something far older and more dangerous. "How is it possible that we didn't know this before?" demanded the Cardinal Prefect, clearly disturbed. "Why weren't we informed?" "Because these matters are handled with the utmost discretion," the man explained. "Knowledge of these creatures is restricted to a select few within the Church. We only intervene when absolutely necessary, as in this case." The Cardinal Prefect fell silent, attempting to process the situation. "Then what do you propose we do now?" he asked at last, his voice heavy with resignation. "The creature must be transferred to one of our specialized facilities," the man replied without hesitation. "We have methods to contain it, but it is not safe to keep it here in the Vatican. It is too dangerous." "And what will happen to it?" I asked, unable to suppress my curiosity and concern. The man in black turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "That is not your concern, Cardinal," he said coldly. "From this moment forward, you are removed from the case. We will handle everything." I felt a mixture of indignation and relief. On one hand, I knew I was being removed from something far greater and more perilous than I had imagined. On the other hand, I could not shake the sense of responsibility for what had transpired. The Cardinal Prefect rose from his chair, looking at the man with an expression of defeat. "Do whatever is necessary," he said in a subdued voice, "but ensure this situation does not spiral further out of control." "We will, Your Eminence," the man replied before signaling to his team. Without another word, the men in black turned and left the office. The Cardinal Prefect sank back into his chair, his face reflecting the weight of the decisions he had just made. As he motioned for me to leave, I couldn't help but feel that the secrets and shadows surrounding the Vatican were far deeper than any of us could imagine. The echo of footsteps resounded in the Vatican's stone corridors as the men in black moved with precision and efficiency. They had arrived with specialized vehicles, prepared to contain and transport something far more dangerous than an ordinary man. From the moment they took control, the entire process unfolded with an almost inhuman efficiency, as if they had done this countless times before. I lingered in the dim light of an adjacent hallway, watching as they prepared the creature for transport. The beast, now once again in its human form, lay chained within the iron cage. Its breathing was labored, its body exhausted after the failed exorcism. Its skin glistened with cold sweat, and its eyes, though dulled, still held a glimmer of the curse that tormented it. The men in black surrounded the cage, inspecting every chain and lock meticulously, ensuring there was no chance of escape. With the same precision, they lifted the cage containing the man and placed it onto the back of one of the trucks. Once it was secured, they prepared to depart. The truck's engine roared to life, and soon the vehicle began to move slowly, carrying the creature and everything it represented away. I stood at the threshold, watching as it disappeared into the distance, a deep sense of emptiness settling over me. The men in black vanished as quickly as they had arrived, leaving only a heavy silence in the Vatican's corridors. I knew the matter was out of my hands now that my role had ended. The days following the creature's transfer felt like a lingering nightmare from which I could not awaken. Though the Vatican's routines continued as normal, everything for me was tinged with the weight of the secret I now carried. One afternoon, walking through the gardens in search of solace, the peace of the cypress trees and fountains seemed unattainable. My mind kept returning to the iron cage, to the desperate face of the man-beast, and to the cold efficiency of the men in black. The Cardinal Prefect had insisted that I remain silent, that the matter must remain buried in the dark recesses of the church, but that silence only deepened my unease. What other shadows lurked in the hidden places of the Vatican? What other truths had been concealed from the world? As I sat on a bench beneath a towering tree, a light breeze carried the scent of the gardens, a faint reminder of the outside world, a world blissfully unaware of the horrors hidden behind the walls of the Holy See. I thought about Ionel and the villagers, about their terrified faces as they watched the cursed man leave. Had we truly rid them of a curse, or had we merely passed it on to ourselves? The events in the exorcism chamber replayed in my mind like a haunting melody I couldn't escape. The growls, the transformation, the blood, and the failure. The church, an institution built on faith, had faltered in the face of something beyond its understanding. It was a realization that shook me to my core. The Vatican's underground archives, its hidden chambers, and its closely guarded secrets no longer seemed like places of reverence and knowledge. They had become symbols of fear and uncertainty. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed a piece of a much larger, darker tapestry, one that wove together centuries of concealed truths. This is not where the story ends. There are more secrets yet to uncover, more questions that demand answers. I will respond to these in a future account. But for now, I must live with the weight of what I know and the knowledge that some things are better left unspoken.